When I stumbled upon the Craigslist ad, I thought I had found the perfect opportunity. A room for rent in a charming wooden house located in a quiet forested area, away from the hustle and bustle of the main city. The price was more than reasonable, and the owner, a guy named Ethan, seemed like someone I could get along with. He was calm, a bit reserved, but friendly during our brief online interaction. Everything seemed to fit perfectly with my search for a new beginning. The first week went smoothly. The house had a rustic charm, and my room was cozy and well lit. Ethan and I kept our paths separate for the most part. He worked from home, locked in his office during the day, and I rarely saw him outside of our occasional encounters in the kitchen. However, it was after a few nights that I began to notice something peculiar about him. Ethan had the habit of getting up in the middle of the night and walking down the hallway to a door that I assumed led to the basement. I would hear his footsteps, the pause before the door, and then silence, every night without fail. Initially, I thought it might be some nocturnal routine or insomnia, but the consistency and the silence that followed made me uncomfortable. The house, with its creaking wood and the shadows of trees dancing in the windows, started to feel less welcoming. 2 weeks passed, and curiosity mixed with discomfort gnawed at me. I decided to confront Ethan about his strange nocturnal habits. One night, when I heard his footsteps in the hallway, I silently followed him. When he stopped in front of the basement door, I called out his name. Ethan turned around sharply, a look of pure terror on his face, and without saying a word, he ran out of the house into the darkness of the forest. Stunned, I approached the door. It was locked, but the key was in the lock. Trembling, I turned the key and opened the door, descending the creaking steps under my weight. What I found was a decrepit basement, unlike the rest of the well-maintained house. There were strange symbols on the walls, objects that appeared to be part of some kind of ritual, and an unbearable odor of decay. Fear overtook me, and a sensation that something terribly wrong was happening there made me run back to my room, grab the essentials, and flee into the night without looking back. Days later, still shaken and temporarily living with a friend, I decided to investigate more about the house and Ethan. To my shock, I discovered that the house had been demolished due to criminal findings that the police did not specify in the available reports online. Ethan, or whoever he was, had disappeared without a trace. To this day, I don't know exactly what Ethan was doing in that house or what the symbols and objects in the basement meant. All I know is that something terrible was happening in that house, and I feel a mix of relief and horror for having escaped before becoming part of whatever dark plan Ethan had. This experience taught me to never ignore the warning signs, especially when something seems too good to be true. And sometimes, the true terror lies not in the monsters under the bed, but in the secrets people hide in the shadows of their seemingly normal lives. It was a typical Wednesday, and I found myself amidst boxes upon boxes. My move was approaching, and every corner of my house reflected that. Between packing and letting go, I decided it was time to part with some old tools I had inherited from my grandfather. They deserve a better home, I thought. So, without much thought, I placed an ad on Craigslist. To my surprise, responses started coming in quickly. Among various messages, one in particular caught my attention. An interested buyer agreed to pay the full price and arranged to pick up the tools by the end of the afternoon. Everything seemed to be going well until the unexpected happened. The buyer arrived much earlier than agreed, as daylight began to fade into twilight. His rush to renegotiate the price was odd, almost desperate. "Sorry, but the price is firm," I told him, trying to be as polite as possible. Without further negotiation, he left, but something in his gaze left me feeling uneasy. Hours passed, and I tried to return to my routine of sorting things out. Then, late at night, I heard the sound of a car approaching again. It was him, insistent, saying he had changed his mind and wanted the tools at the original price. But there was something very wrong. His insistence didn't seem normal. His gaze scanned the area as if looking for something beyond the tools. I refused again, and he finally left, but he left a cloud of discomfort hanging in the air. I decided to peek out the window and noticed his car parked at a curious distance, as if he were watching me. At that moment, fear took over. There was something more sinister in his plans, and I could feel it. Without wasting time, I called the police. My heart pounded as I explained the situation, fearing that something worse could happen at any moment. The minutes until the police arrived felt like hours, but when they did, they found the man still nearby, trying to hide in the shadows of the night. After detaining him, the police informed me that he was armed and had plans to rob my house. His intention had never been to buy the tools. I was terrified but relieved to have listened to my instinct and not allowed him inside. Since that day, I decided to never use Craigslist for any transactions again. Moreover, I became much more cautious, locking all windows and doors, always alert for any signs of danger. The experience taught me a valuable lesson about safety and the risks of interacting with strangers on the internet. That night, I almost paid a very high price for a simple sale on Craigslist. I never thought that a simple search for a TV on Craigslist could turn an ordinary night into an experience that would make me question the safety of interacting with strangers on the internet. My name is Lucas. I'm 25 years old, and this is the story of how a casual online purchase almost became my worst nightmare. I had just moved into a small house in the city where I lived. With a tight budget, I was determined to make that space mine, even if it meant furnishing the house with secondhand pieces. My living room, although cozy, desperately needed a bigger TV, and that's how I started my search on Craigslist. After a few hours of browsing, I found a listing that caught my eye, an old but in good condition TV, at a price that seemed too good to be true. Dan, the seller, was quick to respond. He seemed friendly over email, explaining that he was getting rid of some old items to make room. We scheduled a meeting for that same night at his house so I could see the TV. Looking back, the rush to close the deal should have been my first red flag. Upon arrival, the house seemed harmless under the cover of night. However, a feeling of discomfort set in as I noticed the front door was ajar. I remembered the cordial conversations with Dan over email, trying to convince myself that I was just being paranoid. I was greeted by a man who, immediately, seemed different from the Dan I had been conversing with. His demeanor was abrupt, almost rude, a stark contrast to the welcoming personality I was expecting. It was when I heard a strange noise coming from the kitchen, something like a muffled moan, that my anxiety skyrocketed. The man noticed my hesitation and, in a swift motion, grabbed the money I had extended to him and pushed me towards the door. My heart was racing as I tried to process what had just happened. As soon as I was far enough away, I called the police, reporting the incident and expressing my concern about the strange noise I had heard. The arrival of the police at Dan's house revealed a scene I will never forget. The Real Dan, an elderly and kind man, was tied up and gagged in the kitchen. The man who had greeted me was, in fact, a criminal who had assaulted Dan before my arrival. The capture of the criminal was made possible, ironically, by a Google Calendar invite I had sent to Dan to confirm our meeting. This insignificant digital detail became the key to tracking him down. The Real Dan survived the attack, grateful that my call had brought the police in time. This experience taught me the importance of listening to my instincts and how dangerous trusting strangers on the internet can be. Now, I always think twice before arranging meetings with unknown people, reminding myself of the night I almost became a victim of a situation that went terribly wrong.